and I'd like to welcome Chris Hall, who is the Senior Customer Success Manager at Salonis, to join us. Hello, Chris. Great to have you with us. Chris is an experienced enterprise executive with extensive background in data analytics and a specific focus on enterprise business process optimization. He has been with Salonis for more than 4 years, and prior to that, he was supporting organizations with their business transformation, process excellence, and systems migration initiatives. He worked with IBM for several years with a strong focus in their analytics organization. Real pleasure to have you with us, Chris. Very much looking forward to your presentation.
Excellent. Thanks, Jose, for the warm introduction. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for taking the time with me here today. As Jose mentioned, my name is Chris Hall. I'm one of the Senior Customer Success Managers here at Salonis. And we'll be talking today about navigating these uncertain times and preparing for the future with process excellence. And for those of you who haven't heard of Salonis before, we are the leaders in the process mining marketplace. We are the pioneers in what we like to call our AI powered process mining. And across industry, but very specifically within oil and gas, what our focus is with our clients is leveraging really the fastest, most cost-effective way to 1, preserve cash, 2, optimize working capital, and 3, accelerate productivity. So whether it's in procurement, order to cash, in your ITSM space, but ultimately across any process within your supply chain. When we look at the challenges that our clients are facing today, probably nothing new to those of you on the webinar today around the challenges within oil and gas and the energy space. But I think it's an innovative way that we are changing the game in how organizations look at these challenges. So when we look at the challenges, decreased demand, asset longevity, strict regulations, as you're all aware. When we look at decreasing the demand for the global demand for crude, really in an industry where price is primarily dictated by that demand, finding areas to increase that margin internally is key. And how we're able to do that, or how we're able to have organizations thinking about doing that, is with this complete oversight of your supply chain processes, giving that full transparency and allowing organizations to reduce the internal process costs, right? Increasing those margins in that manner. And we're able to do that through areas around increasing automation or reducing throughput time as a few examples. And when we look at the second challenge that we're facing within organizations today, this idea of asset longevity. So maintaining our current assets and really reinvesting the capital into other areas, more important areas of the business, and ultimately reducing those non-productive hours within the organization. So the ability to predict and avoid these non-productive hours or non-productive time. And when there is non-productive time or there's planned maintenance, right? How do we then leverage something like process mining to accelerate these work orders and reduce the asset downtime? And giving us insight then finally into, if we do have planned maintenance or even unplanned maintenance, right? Do we have the right material availability? And how are we able to get that material from its current warehouse on site as quick as possible? And lastly, when approaching a challenge around the new regulatory environment within oil and gas and the energy space, a lot of producers of crude and natural gas need to be aware of these emission caps and obviously other compliance issues that impact the creation of and the distribution of the product. So how we're able to support that with Salonis, with process mining and in process intelligence, is this idea of real-time audit trail of the important data. So who's touched the data? What changes have they made to the data? When were those changes made? And what was made to that data ultimately? Having a repository of this data and being able to access it in real time is extremely paramount for internal purposes. When we look at external audit trails, accelerating the compliance related processes of gathering that data. So whether it's looking at a certain year or a certain region, being able to accelerate that time is very cost saving, and certainly from an FTE perspective, allows us to then refocus our time and effort onto more important tasks. And then lastly, looking at it from a master data perspective, how are we able to clean up our data internally to provide the proper insights? And how we differentiate ourselves, and as I said before, this is not necessarily a new way of thinking, but really an innovative way of thinking in terms of process excellence and process optimization. So with Salonis and the platform, being able to automate the surfacing of these undesired activities, where now our organization doesn't have to dive into root cause analysis, but rather have a platform like Salonis do that for you. And you'll see here in just a bit when I get into a demonstration, we'll have a focus on our finance process, specifically around payables. As an example, if we're looking at days payable outstanding as a core KPI of focus, right, Salonis can bring to the forefront and surface that our early payment runs are a huge systemic blocker around us hitting that DPO KPI. Secondly, looking at Salonis platform, typically we do this through Lean Six Sigma or centers of excellence, but now Salonis becomes that platform for prescriptive guidance and automated actions to fix these issues that we've surfaced just a bit ago. So looking at creating these automated workflows that are proactive to rearrange our payment runs and assign them differently based on our baseline dates for invoices. And then thirdly, I think what's extremely important in all of this is how we prioritize our workload, how we prioritize our change management efforts based on specific outcomes, based on specific KPIs that have the most financial impact back to the business. So thinking about how we route these invoices differently and how they impact our days payable outstanding targets. And how we're able to do all of this and really what's behind the covers with Salonis is the idea, as I mentioned before, innovating on a new way of thinking around process excellence is through data-driven insights. So leveraging your back-end systems data, so maybe your core ERP, maybe your front-end sales platform, maybe your ITSM platform for tickets, but ultimately giving a visualization of how your process flows and all of the workarounds, all of the deviations and complexity within that process. From there, then allowing Salonis to really sense where the friction, where the complexity lies, and be able, as I said before, to give guidance based on your historical performance around what should be changed in the process today, ultimately driving towards those goals and metrics that you have around your KPIs. And as I said before, really the last portion of that is how do we free then our FTE time up to be able to focus on more impactful business decisions, more impactful business workflow, while Salonis then can automate and really have a touchless approach in the back end around how we fix those issues and those problems. And it starts to change the way of thinking across really three key areas within our business. So from an executive standpoint, it goes from, well, are these the right numbers, right? Why is paid on time so low? And if we're taking all of this effort into change management, what's the percentage of change that we were able to transact on with this, with our efforts across the last month, across the last quarter, across the last year, to a way of thinking around these automated opportunities that are sorted by impact, as I mentioned before, right? Where should we be focused? Salonis then begins to surface that and give us real-time answers to our KPI performance. And we can constantly track that in real time around how well we're performing against our metrics. To a level deeper around where our managers can act more proactively. So in the past, historically, right, tracking this type of performance was very time consuming. It was hard to know exactly what the root cause was. We were understanding that KPIs weren't being met, but why weren't they being met? And then the challenge that managers face trying to get the organization from into a change management process was near impossible. To leveraging Salonis, now the way of thinking is going to be around this idea of seeing our performance in an overall management board, understanding what targets are being met by certain vendors, what material groups, maybe what regions, being able to focus on those areas that aren't meeting our KPIs, and having Salonis really surface those systemic blockers of the process to the forefront and giving us a prescriptive way and having actions built in for that change management effort, as I mentioned, to really a level deeper of our individual employees, maybe like an accounts payable clerk who deals with invoices on a regular basis, where typically their approach is, I can't prioritize a way that invoices come in. I'm really wasting my time on invoices that aren't looking at driving financial impact, and there's just too many in a day. I don't know where to focus, to a more prioritized focus on a daily basis, where Salonis is giving me the insight of what invoice I should be focusing on first and foremost, what invoice is going to have the biggest financial impact, and then allowing an automated task on the back end to send out updates, notifications to vendors, internal teams, and so on, as well as now I can focus on more of the complex invoices that need my time, diving deeper into that root cause, allowing me to proactively take action on the impact or the invoices that have the greatest impact. And some of what we've done across the oil and gas industry, I think, is a great insight around how within your organization you can take this and really drive the same type of results. So when looking at that asset longevity, as I mentioned before, one of our Fortune 10 oil and gas companies, we were able to save them over $40 million a year in savings. Looking at, in an unplanned downtime approach, of how do we accelerate and how do we predict when these wells, these refineries, certain different assets within them are going to come up for maintenance, or when they are up for maintenance, as I mentioned before, how do we automate or accelerate those work orders, reducing the throughput time to get those assets back up and running, and reducing that non-productive time. To looking at, in a large oil field services company down in Houston, their on-time payment rate in addressing what we saw as a root cause, a very simplistic root cause behind payment blocks. But there were payment blocks that were set in place that weren't necessarily a business priority or a business decision that needed to be made. Some of those payment blocks were removed based on cleaning up some of the master data that was captured in the backend system, but also when those payment blocks were necessary, automating that based on rule sets and regulations within that organization to really increase their on-time payment by 20%. And lastly, I think a great example, and one that we'll focus on within the demo here in just a second, is within a mid-sized upstream oil company, where looking at their payables process, we were looking at root causes around late payment terms and increasing payment terms for the organizations based on different vendors, and looking at what invoices should be prioritized for capturing discounts. So whether we pay early to receive a cash discount, or whether we pay on time because the on-time payment rate actually gives us more capital to work with, but really prioritizing which invoices should be paid when, and being able to result in about $2 million in savings for those organizations. And I'll show you how they were able to do that within a quick demonstration here. So we look at the Salonis platform, and we go back to the three different levels of how we're going to incorporate or digest this data. Really, this is our executive view and dashboard. And remember, all of this data that we're seeing here is being fed from the back end core ERP or supply chain systems to give us these insights. So as an executive, if I come in the morning and I see my dashboard here in my finance control center, so think of me as either the CFO or potentially the VP of finance, where I'm looking at some of my core targets across the finance space. I can see my revenue, I can see my expenses and cash balance, but what really jumps out to me is our KPIs that we're trying to monitor over the next quarter, where I see DPO, cash discount rate, touchless invoice rate, and duplicate payments. Salonis has prioritized for me that days payable outstanding should be a heavy focus for me over the next quarter, where here I can see what my current DPO is. It's 17 days. right? As a target internally, I want to focus more on that 30-day mark, and I can see that the potential impact of moving from 17 days to 30 days has about a $6.7 million impact across all of my KPIs, which is one of the highest impacts, and this is where I want to focus. So as a CFO or a VP of finance, I want to notify my team that this is going to be the focus for the next quarter. So here I can switch my priority from our lost cash discount to our days payable outstanding. And on the back end, what will happen is it will actually notify my vendors, or excuse me, my accounts payable clerks, my managers, and I can even go in and send off an email if I want and notify my accounts payable lead, right, that this is going to be the focus over the next quarter. So a single pane of glass as an executive, where now I can see what our focus should be and notify my team leads that we want to focus on this over the next quarter. And I can also see high-level insights around what my DPO was a couple months ago to what it is today, right? Here's my baseline in 30 days. Today I'm at that 17 days, as I mentioned. Now switching to that manager role, as I mentioned before, and what we see as a steering board, I now see logging in the morning that my executive team has reprioritized what I need to focus on to this days payable outstanding. And once again, I can see kind of the systemic trends over the course of time here. I get that steering board around, what vendors, what company code, what their targets are. So my target across all vendors is 30 days. I can see the ones that are hitting those 30 days, and I can see the ones of focus that I might be at the 17 days, and really start to prioritize. But as I mentioned before, what is most important to me is what are those systemic blockers? And this is where Salonis is able to surface those to the forefront, and I can see that early invoice payment is really that undesired activity that's causing the most complexity or friction within my DPO KPI. So here, I can then jump into that early invoice payment and start to dive into the root cause. And Salonis, as I said before, really prescribes an action that I need to take to correct this early invoice payment. And what Salonis has detected is that the invoices that are currently scheduled for the upcoming payment run obviously are being paid too early. So if I'm able to select all of these invoices and auto postpone the payment until each invoice is due, obviously I'm then affecting my DPO target. So very easily, I'm able to select those 47 invoices that Salonis has identified for me, and I can postpone that payment. And here we see all of that being done automatically on the back end. Now for future payment runs, what I can also do is I can take an action to make this reoccurring. So now I don't have to come in every day and postpone that payment run. Salonis is doing that proactively and in an automated fashion on the back end. Additionally, if I wanted to see then as an individual payment clerk, so taking this in a more operational instance, if I'm that accounts payable clerk coming in every day, working on my individual invoices, as I mentioned before, Salonis has now prioritized for me what invoices are going to be most impactful and what invoices are going to take the most of my time on this daily basis, and really prioritize based on our an urgent priority need, a medium priority need, and so on. So here, as that accounts payable clerk, I can then take action on this individual invoice. Salonis has identified some key issues here where this particular invoice, the payment terms are differing from the contracted payment terms. So I can quite simply adjust the terms from 30 days to 60 days, obviously to realize a working capital benefit on just this particular invoice of almost $6,600. So there's a couple actions that are recommended by Salonis that I can take. So I can update the invoice payment terms, and what that does on the back end, it updates those payment terms in your ERP system automatically for you. So once again, single pane of glass. We don't need to go back to that core system and make the changes. We can do that right here in Salonis. And then I want to update and notify my vendor and the master data team. So here I have a pre-canned email that I can then send out to the contact of that vendor, and it pulls in all of the information from that back-end source system. I can execute and send that out. obviously accelerating my time and effort within updating that invoice. And then I can go on to my next invoice and clear all of these out from my to-do list on a daily basis. Now, switching back to that role of VP of Finance, after all of that change management has been done over the course of the last quarter, I can go back in with my team and I can look at how our change management affected our DPO over that last quarter. And when I see the update here, if we remember back, it used to be 17 days, but now based on all of that action that I took within the steering board, updating those invoices automatically for their payment runs, from the accounts payable clerk, moving those payment terms within that one example of that invoice, I now have driven my DPO from 17 days to 32 days. And if we remember back, that initial financial impact was 6.7. I now have a remaining potential impact of 2.3. So over the course of those quarters, I've saved almost $4 million in terms of working capital that I can put back into the organization in different areas. And now maybe I want to look at a new area or new KPI, potentially around touchless invoices, as I see that potential impact within Salonis has now targeted this as the new KPI of focus for the next quarter. So I want to thank you again for the time today. That was all I had to share. If there is interest, I will open this up to questions and answers now, but I did just want to share a quick resource for you. If there's more information or insight that you'd like to see around Salonis, what we've been doing with our clients, please check out this link, www.salonis.com/resources for any additional information or insight.
Very good, Chris. Very good. So thank you for sharing that and gives us the insights on the approaches and the technology. So there are some questions that have come up during your presentation here. So first of all, to establish a bit of a context for everybody, there are a couple questions. I'm just going to separate. The first one is, tell us a little bit about kind of your typical customer. What do they look like? What type of organization, size, and what type of applications do they use?
Yeah, Jose, great question. So for us, as I mentioned before, for me personally, my focus is very heavily in the oil and gas sector, energy corridor. But for Salonis holistically, a lot of our client base is going to be within the manufacturing space as well. So those big manufacturers. And this is applicable across any size client. We have clients ranging from 300 employees. That's a manufacturer for electronics, Schukat out of Europe, all the way up to 3M, right? In terms of hundreds of billions of dollars in their supply chain. So regardless of the size of the organization, there's significant impacts to be had. But manufacturers, oil and gas, healthcare are really our, I guess, main industries of focus. But we do have focus across the CPG space, the high tech space as well. But primarily within those organizations and the applications that our clients use are going to be your core ERP systems of focus initially, right? So your SAPs, your Oracles, your Microsoft Dynamics. And then that is where a lot of our organizations start their process mining journey, but then they expand to cloud platforms such as ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workday, all key applications that we have pre-built content for, which accelerates the deployment for our clients.
Very good, Chris. And tell us a little bit about another question that has come up is a bit more about the applications of technology and RPA, AI, machine learning, and process mining. Tell us a little bit about in the oil and gas industry, what do you see that organizations are benefiting most from in terms of new technologies at this point?
Yeah, well, I think, Jose, to your point, from starting, whether it's a digital transformation, looking at moving to cloud, whether it's looking at RPA and areas for automation approach, we see a lot of our clients and organizations starting with process mining. Quite simply, you saw the operational approach that I shared with you today. But process mining also gives great insight just into what and how do our processes function today? What is the workflow? So having that historical view gives our clients great insight as to, once again, where our priorities should focus. So then tying into RPA-driven opportunities, Salonis can bring to light what activities in a process are highly automated, that we may be just spinning our wheels, for lack of a better term, with RPA, and what activities in a workflow have low automation rates and have big financial impact for RPA. So we see this as, I guess, a very tandem approach within organizations to support insights with process mining initially, but giving us ideas into where we may want to move to the cloud, how we can help with systems migration and give that insight, and then moving to tying into their RPA platform. So UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, right? Some of the big names in automation. Because I think automation, as an example, doesn't solve all issues of process, but it does solve maybe 10, 15, 20% of process. And this gives great insight as to where we should place those digital workers, as I call them, within the process flow.
Very good. You know, our previous speaker, Biju Misra from Enbridge, talked about RPA and process mining, specifically in the oil and gas industry and getting started. I'm curious about your perspectives from a technological perspective. What is the best way? And let's just pick process mining. You talked a little bit about RPA already. If you focus on process mining for organizations that have not started yet, what is the best candidate for process mining? What does that look like? And to start small and scale, how do you go about choosing the right places to implement process mining?
Yeah. I think based on our experience is a great place to start, right? In the oil and gas space, we have very significant clients driving a lot of value. So leaning on the best practices and what we've done in the past to drive value is a great starting point. But the way that we deploy Salonis, and ultimately from a commercial model as well, having it as a user-based approach allows organizations to look into different processes and ultimately run a type of analysis to show where the greatest financial impact is. So almost like a pilot or a proof of concept before scaling large into that specific area. So as an example, we may want to look at the core supply chain around procurement or potentially order to cash, but we don't know where to start, right? We could focus on both of those processes, run what I would call an assessment or a diagnostic to see what has the greatest financial impact. And if it is uncovered that procurement has the greatest financial impact, we can then reposition those user licenses into procurement to run, obviously, a more holistic view of that process and constantly monitor it month over month, year over year. So by leveraging, obviously, our expertise and what we've done in the industry in the past with this idea of assessment driven type of approach in the beginning, gives organizations great insight as to where to start their process mining journey. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, where organizations are starting is that core supply chain. And I call it the backbone of the supply chain. But it's your procurement processes, it's your sales processes, right? Because we can't kick anything off if we don't have goods or materials, and there's no processes happening if we're not selling or producing anything. So those are great areas that have high complexity, that are the core backbone of organizations that are going to result in the biggest financial impact, which we've seen across all of our clients within all industries, but very specifically within oil and gas.
Very good. And Chris, on the diagnostic piece, and I know that this will vary dramatically depending on client types and the complexity of the process, so on and so forth. But just as an average estimate, if you will, how long does that typically take to just run the diagnostics to get a pretty good feel for where to focus?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Jose, it's gonna vary differently based on what source system you pull in. If you're leveraging our out-of-the-box connectors and components, that obviously accelerates it. But on average, to get to that quick diagnostic, anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks, we can pull in that data, get connected, validate the insights, and really give you that first glance of where your process complexity lies, and as you saw in the demonstration, right, surface those systemic blockers and tie a business impact to them. So now you have multiple processes, much like I showed you in that steering board and executive dashboard around DPO, around lost cash discounts, but imagine that as procurement, finance, order to cash, where you can see the different financial impacts and then be able to make that informed decision of where we want to start our process mining journey.
Very good, very good. And Chris, what are you seeing in the marketplace now that with the pandemic? How have things shifted in more in the terms of what applications are becoming more relevant as a result of this distancing that we're experiencing, and maybe the oil and gas industry focus on certain processes that may have been enhanced by the pandemic. What shifts have been driven by this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, a big shift towards finance, right? So whether it's a payables process, whether it's a receivables process, a lot of organizations within the oil and gas and our clients specifically had this focus of ERP migrations as use cases, right? Looking at process change. So how do we blueprint the process we have today and create a better template, a global standard, if you will? And the shift has been towards more of operational in approach. And as you see, and how we've innovated on our platform has become this operational in approach, where now we're looking at preserving cash. Obviously, working capital is huge, especially in the oil and gas space. We've been now shifting focus to FTE productivity. All right. Unfortunately, through these times, there's been a lot of layoffs, a lot of cutbacks, and we have less FTEs to do a lot of the same amount of work within the organization. How do we get more productivity out of them? And organizations are focusing on kind of that front end that I showed you today around operationalizing this, using Salonis automation to increase that productivity with FTE, looking at things like DPO, looking at things like day sales outstanding to get that cash back in the door so that we can reinvest it. And I would say the biggest shift, right, is into that operational focus within Salonis and across finance as a key driver, a key process within those organizations.
So guide us through what a typical implementation may look like if you're implementing a platform like Salonis. You have talked about some segments, but I don't want to interpret too much from that and extrapolate too much from that. So if you've got a big picture, if you are part of my digital transformation, I'm implementing a platform like that, what does that may look like?
Yeah, a lot of what we do in, I'll call it the pre-sales cycle of all of this. So it's the organizations really understanding where this fits in. Is this a platform that I want to bring into my environment, into the production environment within my organization? Is obviously testing out Salonis. Not every client has to test it out. Some clients just look at the experience we have and the value that we've driven and move forward with Salonis. Other organizations want to do what we call a proof of value, which is a very short, I guess, POC, proof of concept, if you will, where we take a set of data, we bring that into our system, and we show you the insights, much like I mentioned, in that 3 to 4 weeks of kind of the assessment work. Why I mentioned that is because that lays some of the groundwork for the implementation. So if the POV is already done, we've built out analysis, we validated that analysis, we can actually then just really transcribe that into the production system. So the analysis is just taken over into the productive environment and really attached to the underlying source systems. So overall, when an organization decides to move forward with something like Salonis, there's really 4 primary targets of an implementation. The first is going to be connecting to that backend source system that we want to process mine. So whether it's your core ERP, SAP platforms, Oracle, Microsoft, as I mentioned, maybe it's a cloud platform connecting via Salonis via API. We have those pre-built connectors. That's the first step, right? Is connecting and scoping out the data set that we want to process mine. The second is ultimately validating that data, making sure that all the data tables, the data fields that are important to you in mining those insights from are within that data set. The third is going to be obviously building out the different analysis based on your KPIs. So as you saw in the demonstration, we would have a days payable outstanding analysis built. We'd have a lost cash discount analysis built, a touchless invoice, etc. There's a lot of pre-built content for those analysis that you can just pull in from the Salonis Intelligent Business Application Store. And then the fourth part of that is actually enablement. We like to, for lack of a better term, teach our clients how to fish. So the implementation in full usually takes 4 to 6 weeks per process across those really 4 key milestones. And then organizations, we like to enable them as such where the second, third, fourth processes are primarily done on their own based on that enablement that we do in a side-by-side, a teacher teaching approach, if you will, within organizations.
Very good, very good. Chris, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, the possibilities of the technology, and very much appreciate you guiding us through all of that.
Jose and everyone, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate the opportunity. Have an awesome day.
Thank you, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, this wraps up our segment of BTOES Oil and Gas Live with Chris. And at the top of the hour, we're going to be welcoming Brad Sullivan, who is a leader for Ford Networks, and he's going to talk to us about the intent-based networking, which is methodology and technology, and why it matters specifically in the COVID-19 context, and how organizations are using intent-based networking to achieve operational excellence. So a very interesting talk combining the business landscape with very advanced networking technologies and the ways to make networking more efficient, especially on this socially distant environment that we're working on. We're putting a lot of weight and on networks. Networks now are dealing with loads that they did not deal with before. And so Brad Sullivan is going to guide us through that. I think that for a lot of you, IBM or intent-based networking is a brand new topic. You probably, most of you never heard of it before. So we're going to go a little bit behind the scenes and show you how very progressive organizations are using intent-based networking to streamline operations now and certainly have more efficient networks. Now, so we'll see you at the top of the hour. Thank you, and keep your questions going here, but also on LinkedIn, and we'll check back on at the top of the hour. Thank you.